you're not aware or... How was the break? Was it a break? Is it fair to call it a break in any way?
It was so good.
Yeah, it was great. I loved
I haven't
it.
been in classes for 2 weeks. It's
Yeah.
been amazing.
It's a break of sorts, I suppose, isn't it? Yeah, of sorts. It's qualifying. It's like too excited.
No, like we had a kid, but I made placement. We used to work with me. Yeah, officers are like so good.
Yeah.
So I was there on Wednesday and we were there on Saturday.
Oh man.
I think that was a nice little break day. We took the kids to
2
the
hours
show
and 1 parent talks
on Tuesday. It was like Monday was a trouble day because we're picking the steps up and going up and stuff.
Yeah. It's been exciting.
And my
So
dog.
I like normal this afternoon will be interesting for the college. Nice, that'll be interesting.
So before we start, I thought I'd just quickly explain it. So initially this class was scheduled for next week, but to accommodate some people helping us out, it sounds like a circus. No idea what that's about.
No idea. Secretly what we're doing.
So next week we're going to do, rather than a leadership panel, so I'm conscious that there was a leadership panel that Richard organised for, was it a spiritual day not that long ago. So Amanda, you did miss out on that, but instead oh yeah, you too. So hell, yeah, it was, oh, so it wasn't a holiday. Anyway, no, you never took up weeks. So what we're going to do next week is do some interviews. Don't stress too much about it. What I'll do after class, I'm going to reveal some interview questions from years previous that people have asked the panel. And rather than having most of you sit through another panel, you'll have the opportunity to go off and interview one of the officers. It's just a 20-minute interview. So you're probably going to ask
We just have to ask the questions, right?
3, 4,
Yeah,
5 questions.
Some of them not answering.
No, you're not. So I'll give you a little mobile phone tripod and just grab one of your mobile phones. You don't have to be in the frame if that makes you feel any better. So you can just set it up so it's the person you're interviewing being video recorded. Hit record, interview them, and then the interview's going to last about 20 minutes. We'll probably do it in 3 or 4 groups. Then come back and we'll play the interviews in class so everyone gets the learning from all the interviews. And then the last half an hour we'll look at the LPI inventory and just go through your results and just give you an opportunity. So that again isn't a super formal thing, it's just an opportunity to raise anything that you found particularly interesting or helpful that might be of benefit to everyone else in the class.
So will we get the results in an email or something? Or?
Yeah, so that was on my mind. Yeah,
Okay.
You haven't got results yet? No? Alright, so I'll make a note to follow that up. They should be set up to be automatically released, and I thought they were probably done by now, but obviously not. So Alright, I'll follow that up later today and let you know where it's up to.
We're definitely back up.
I'm going to play, that'll be enough of the song for most of you to probably know what that song was. So this is a song called Imagine by John Lennon. So looking at conflict resolution this morning, I was just listening to this song on the way into class. I'm thinking, how beautifully it captures some of what's wrong with the world. some of the conflict and how that affects people, how it affects us, and what it might be like without it. And in the context of not only leadership, but leadership within the church, there's a couple of lines in there which are a little bit anti-religious, and it sort of got me thinking, well, what's our role in conflict resolution, not just within the church, but perhaps outside the church as well. So have a listen to this, and then we'll get stuck into it after this. So I think part of what conflict resolution is imagining a better future in any given situation. And conflict's probably something we're all familiar with to greater and lesser extents. When we talk about conflict, I wonder if we've all got perhaps the same understanding of what conflict is, or perhaps not. What do you understand conflict to be?
A disagreement between two people?
Good.
But it doesn't have to be a conflict, but now that I've said that, I take it back.
My backseats.
Yeah. Here's one definition.
Maybe it's some sort of clash.
Yep. very strangely broken. Sorry.
This is Mac one.
I don't want to do that. Oh, I'm going to switch views. I'll just switch that back. So conflict refers to the process, one definition says, that occurs when one party perceives another party is negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that the first party cares about. That's from organisational behaviour, psychological perspective textbook. And yeah, I think kind of we probably all intrinsically know what we mean when we talk about conflict. And I think as far as a working definition goes, I don't know what I've actually said. Very confused right still, but maybe I'll just click that. No, back to my yeah, I guess there's that sense, you know, other words we might use are conflict of fight or argument, disagreement, and there's varying levels of conflict and the contexts in which conflict can occur. So conflict management, which I guess might be slightly different to conflict resolution, depending on how pedantic you want to be. Conflict management would refer to interventions that alter the level and form of conflicts in ways that maximise its benefits and minimise its dysfunctional consequences. So one helpful way to think about conflict management or conflict resolution, I think, is about learning to it's not about not fighting or not having conflict, because I think sometimes conflict, healthy levels of conflict can be good, and I think it's unrealistic to think we're ever going to resolve all conflict. I guess in that sense you might say that the song Imagine is idealistic and not achievable. But I think conflict resolution, conflict management is about learning to fight better. It's about learning to fight fair. And in some cases learning to resolve the fight. So it will depend on where your mind goes as I say these things, whether you might even be more or less inclined to agree with me. And as we sort of work our way through the content this morning, feel free to jump in and clarify things or ask questions. We might be thinking about different things such as the nature of language. So as far as context goes, we could think of conflict in an internal sense. We have that inner sense of conflict where it feels like we're fighting ourselves and can't, I guess that inner wrestle. There's interpersonal conflict between people, typically you might be face to face with, and then at the far end of the spectrum you've got international conflict. And then there's everything in between. For the purpose of what we're looking at this morning, we're typically looking at that interpersonal conflict. There's the conflict between people in our spheres. We'll limit what we're talking about to that simply for the fact that we only have a few hours together to talk about it, and we're not going to solve all the world's problems, sadly, in that time. So challenges and barriers to conflict resolution. What to your mind are some challenges or barriers to resolving conflict?
Differing values and views.
Yep. That's good.
The actual facts that are presented may not be facts.
Yeah.
Stubbornness.
Yes.
I was going to say only one person wants to get on board with the resolution.
Yep.
Pride.
What the motivation is of one person or another.
Yep.
How long it's been going?
Yes.
The structures, like you might be limited by the workplace and how you can actually resolve it.
That's true.
External influences, like money or job status or...
Yep.
Values, prejudice.
I think numbers too, like how many people are on which side.
Mm.
Like
Yeah,
if
that's
you've got
true
one
too.
person, you might have all of their family as well on their side against one person, for example.
And sometimes people can present the facts along those lines. They might say, we all think. It's like, well, who's we to start with? Because
Just you.
maybe it's just you trying to make it
Mm.
sound like everyone's upset, but it's not. Yeah.
Even job title, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it means it's pretty much, this is what I say it is, and that's how it's going to be.
With emotions as well. Like they can be helpful and I think they're valid sometimes. But I think they can be a challenge to deal with.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. I'm sure we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot of factors, and it's good, I think, to think about what is known and what is unknown, and what is knowable and what's not knowable. So some of these factors are below the surface, and you may or may not be able to access the information, some of which could be critical to resolving the conflict. In a ministry setting, especially if you're walking into an established place, which is the typical scenario, I guess, in most ministries, and you've got relationships that have been going on for years, decades, generations even, perhaps, you're not going to necessarily know that this family has got a grievance against that family and has so for 3 generations or something. So what looks like an issue over X is anything but. It's just one more episode in a long line of issues. And then, what emotions does that tap into? What facts are present to us? What are inaccessible? All these varying factors. So what does effective communication look like?
Passive aggressive.
So just actually being clear.
Yeah, actually talking and not
Yeah.
just ignoring the problem.
I think a lot of conflict happens because people haven't talked.
Yep, I think that's true. To my mind, there's a few areas that we need clear communication in. So the first is obviously in preventing conflict. Good communication has the possibility of preventing conflict. Naturally, there's what needs to be done during the conflict. So, are we talking about 2 adults who are treating each other with respect? There's no obvious power imbalance. It's what you might term a healthy conflict, that there's an issue that's not easily resolvable and they're trying to work it out. Or is there a power imbalance? Are people not living by values that we're comfortable with as they try to figure this out? There's this part after the conflict as well, where, okay, there's been a conflict, the moment of conflict is over, and now we've moved to a time of trying to resolve the conflict. Or that might even be that the moment's gone, but the conflict still remains, so we're trying to figure out how do we resolve it, what does good communication look like then? And then once the conflict is over and it is resolved, what's good communication look like then in perhaps preventing further conflict? So there's a little bit of a cyclical element to it. And as long as there's people in relationship with each other, there's going to be conflict. That's just the nature of people and all animals, really. And different factors, as we've already discussed. Sometimes it might be competing for resources, limited funding, or a certain time where both parties want something to happen. Could be a whole bunch of things. How conflict is dealt with at each point along that line is going to massively influence how it plays out, and it will also affect the culture of the place. So as leaders, how do we manage that? I mean, I don't know, have any of you ever been to a conflict resolution workshop or anything of the sort before? Yeah, in a core setting or a church setting? Yeah. So, do you remember much of that, Bethany? What that was like? It was probably a long time ago.
Really last year.
Okay. Now you're going to feel really bad if you can't remember. Last year's still a long time ago when it comes to.
We just did workshopy sort of things on different scenarios and how you would approach it on preventing conflict. Was a lot around communication and being clear with people about what expectations are.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Do you think it would affect how conflict is dealt with in that place moving forward?
That was the point. Yep.
Yeah. And do you know how successful it's been?
I don't know how to measure that.
Yeah.
Because I left 4 months later, so I don't know the context now.
Yeah.
But it was also it was a chaotic environment and people that don't have mental capacity to understand conflict. So it was mainly just our 4 leadership key people that were addressing conflict.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Different setting. I did one, it talked about personalities and how different personalities approach conflict in different ways and how they handle it in different ways.
Yep. So on the integral theory, that all quadrant, all level, all lines, all types, all states, that all types around personality types, that sort of stuff can be hugely enlightening to understand, this is the type of person I am, but not everyone's like me, and this is how I work, and what comes naturally, but others are different. I think and I guess that's about self-discovery, but it also, if we're learning about others, there's an element of communication in that as well, and trying to understand where other people are coming from. Someone else said something earlier, I think one of the definitions, that sort of reminded me of the whole sense of reframing as well, which Grant spoke about. There's this intentional trying to understand the other and how they work and how they work in relation to other people and to me, and to be able to move forward in communicating well around some of that stuff can be super helpful. So we're going to spend most of this morning working through some models of conflict resolution. They're primarily from the book, The Conflict Resolution Toolbox, which is in the library. Models and Maps for Analysing, Diagnosing and Resolving Conflict by Gary Thurling. Very, very helpful book, and as has been my approach in this unit, it's really, the purpose is to provide some tools to put in the toolbox that hopefully, in understanding these different models, enables you to see things as they are. It's all, for me, part of that idea of defining reality. And then you can apply that in your life. So naturally that's going to occur as is the purpose of this unit in leadership, in ministry, but I think we'd be selling ourselves short to just think, well, that's all this is good for. We're whole persons, and we live in families and in groups and in communities, and this is something I think that's very applicable in all different areas of life. So the first one is something called the circle of conflict, and the circle of conflict is a model that diagnoses and categorises the underlying causes or drivers of conflict. It categorises these into one of 5 categories. If can see 6 things up there, so bear with me. If your brain just goes, that's all right. So there's values, relationships, and external factors or moods. They're all above the line and different to data and structure, which is below the line. The 6th category here, interests, represents the focus for resolution. So what we want to do is keep our focus when we're looking at conflict below the line, as you can't directly solve values or relationships or external issues or moods with the other party. So this is a issue of diagnosis. So that's where our focus is. Below the line, what's the data? What's the facts? What's the structure? And what interests are being looked at. So quick note on values. When we're talking about values, we're talking about belief systems, people's sense of right and wrong, good or bad, just and unjust. It includes all the values and beliefs held by the party that are contributing to or causing conflict, life-denying values, or day-to-day values of a company or church. Who remembers what the Salvation Army's new values are? How are we going with that?
Caring for people. Is it those ones? Caring
So
for
the
people.
integrity,
Compassion,
compassion.
diversity,
Collaboration.
You've done so well. Yeah, I think we're missing one, but that's pretty good. And who remembers what the old values were? Is justice still one of the values?
Probably.
Hope so.
I think overall it would be. Might not be
Yeah.
written down.
And that's a really,
That's what
really
bugs
good.
me.
Yeah, but what a good
There's still
point.
values that aren't written.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because I wonder for, take some of the consultants who come in, if they're from a business school, which most of them probably are, excellence is often a value. I don't think excellence is a value in the Salvation Army. We won't go into what that means or not. But different people hold different values, and we can put a poster up on a wall that says these are our values, and that's exactly what we do in the Salvation Army. And I'm not saying that's not a good thing, because I think it is, because it puts it up there and says this is actually what we care about.
You need to at least agree with these.
Yeah, so these are sort of kind of what we're about, but there's also all sorts of other values. So I can think of some call where musical excellence would be a value for a lot of the members of that church. It's not on a poster anywhere, no one talks about it, but it's a value. So if you think how that value influences the way practices occur, and you're trying to do something that causes conflict because you're interfering with their ability to practice their music, that's not going to be at all apparent to you necessarily, is it? You might never come to that, because it's, so that's what we're trying to keep it below the line, and that's where it's important to have good communication and actually try to work through with people, okay, what's actually going on here. Also, I think a value that's rarely spoken of, that you often find in the church, is hospitality, and it often seems to fall to the women as well, who, to their credit, typically do a great job with that. But again, you could imagine doing something, cancelling something, and you think it doesn't matter, this isn't important, and it could tap right into that whole sense of values. So value-based conflict tends to be heated and personal, because it is usually in areas that are important to us, to who we are and how we feel as human beings. Relationships is obviously a huge part of what it means to be a person, to be in a church, and as leadership, we're forming our own relationships and moving within and across other people's relationships. They're influenced by negative experience in the past, by stereotypes, by poor or failed communication, repetitive negative behaviour. All those will tap into conflict across relationships. Here we identify specific negative experiences in the past as a cause of conflict. Relationship conflict occurs when past history or experience with another party creates or drives the current negative situation. It can lead to stereotypes being formed, tit for tat behaviour, and restricted or ending of communication between parties. And when you have that communication breakdown, it can be inferred some pretty difficult times. So then we've got moods and external factors unrelated to the substance of the dispute, psychological or physiological. So someone might be just having a bad hair day and they just are grumpy and you've got no idea. Many people would think, what have I done? But it's quite possibly nothing to do with you. You can be dealing with someone who woke up on the wrong side of the bed. They might have chronic pain. Maybe their home life is falling apart. It might just be the weather depressing them. It could be anything that's going to spark this conflict. Again, all outside of your control, all outside of your sphere of awareness, and therefore we try to be mindful of that, but also mindful of our limited agency in doing anything about it. This is probably, for me, the most helpful diagnostic tool, this circle of conflict. It's really, I think, just allows you to take one massive big step back from any individual type of conflict and acknowledge, okay, but there's all this sort of stuff. It's a shame they haven't used the reverse of below the line and above the line, I think, in their analogy, because I would say this is also below the line. It's inaccessible to me, whereas normally I'm thinking if it's above the line I can see it, but they've sort of used the opposite way around, where they're saying you can see below the line instead of above the line.
You're saying, or are you saying, above the line is things that you can't influence?
Yeah, so...
Because with relationships, is there communication? Surely you can help someone communicate with someone else in a better way, and have influence in that situation, couldn't you?
You can. When they talk about relationships in this context, I think what they're saying is that there's all sorts of pre-existing relationships and you might not know. Sometimes I don't know who's related. Or whether there's some intergenerational conflict or something.
So with this example that I'm talking about with the communication, where would that fit on the circle?
So communication happens with people in relationships. So if that's where the sort of the confusion, well, not even confusion, but what you're saying.
Well, it was just that you were saying that you can't influence the top half, and communication was in the top half.
I wouldn't say you can't influence it, because you can probably have some influence on people's values, relationships, or mood.
Okay.
It's just that it's already happening to them.
Oh, okay.
And that's not necessarily accessible to you.
Okay.
It might be accessible to you, and the more you're in relationship with people, then the more you'll understand who they are and their other relationships. I think
really you need to know the stuff above the line, don't you? Don't you need to find that out as well?
Yeah, but I guess what this model is saying is how much of that's immediately accessible at the point of conflict. So if a conflict occurs, say a conflict occurs here now, and we don't really know what, say, Min's relationship is to Graham, or is good.
But what if that's what the conflict is really about? What if it is about the relationship?
So that's where we need to get to.
The conflict can't be fixed until you deal with the actual issue.
No. So that's what we're going to look at now, the data and the structure of the conflict.
What's that?
and what the interest or conflicting interests might be. So all the stuff above the line is ultimately accessible to us. I can just say, well, you know, are you in a bad mood? And no, that's not it all.
You can
Yeah,
ask
actually. Yeah. And my ability to ask that would depend on the quality of the relationship. So it's not necessarily that it's not accessible, but walking in to especially a group of people you don't know what they truly value. You don't know what their mood is in that exact moment, although there might be indicators around
So is it
that.
like above the line a hidden thing, whereas the bottom, below the line is more obvious?
That's right, and perhaps
Okay.
more easy to access and deal with.
Okay.
Because
Right.
if you're talking about an ongoing conflict for years and years and years, you probably are at some point going to need to understand a lot of that above the line stuff.
Yeah.
But walking in, you're not going to know any of it necessarily unless you're asking questions. And it would be a very long way and impractical way to deal with all levels of conflict. So if you're a consultant, like I think of the guys who did Spiral Dynamics and went into South Africa and worked with these people over months and years, they kind of need to end up working above the line. But if you're at a church and there's a conflict between two people, it's not going to be practical in every single situation to start to go through a whole relationships thing, the underlying values.
So you start below the line.
Yeah, that's
Right.
certainly the, and what I said just at the end, I just wish they'd used flip the analogy. But anyway, we'll work with that. So data, this is about lack of information or misinformation. Sometimes we have too much information that we're not really able to openly discuss, so we have to, we might be quite aware of what the conflict is, or part of the nature of it, but unable to just talk openly about that. Data or information is identified in this model as a key driver to conflict. Data conflict occurs when the information that the parties are working with is incorrect or incomplete. So Graham, you were talking about that earlier. Or there is an information differential. One party has important information the other party doesn't have. These data problems often lead to further negative assumptions and further data problems. So it's sort of like wandering off using a compass 2 degrees off course. Not a big deal. If you're just travelling 50 metres, you'll probably get there and go, oh yeah, there it is, 2 steps to the right. If you do that over 100 kilometres, you'll probably end up in a different town or something. So interpretation of the data can be another issue in this area. Data doesn't always speak for itself. It needs to be interpreted. We see that very clearly, I think, in biblical interpretation of data and how that allows us to all end up in very different understandings. So we need to be mindful of how other people and how ourselves might be incorrectly joining the dots, misunderstanding and mishearing things. So I think that's a little bit of what Grant discussed with reframing. Do you remember what Grant said about reframing? And yeah, sometimes you're talking about the same issue, but coming at it from such different places, you're just not going to get there. So then if you can reframe how you are seeing it and talk about it in terms that they understand, that can be helpful. I'm going to play a super short clip from Seinfeld called The Lip Reader, which I think cleverly shows how conflict around misunderstandings can occur if our lovely internet will work.
I love this product. It's amazing because it does what it says it's going to
What a
do.
great ad.
There were no napkins. Whoever is responsible for stocking that concession stand cost me a relationship.
They never have napkin stamps.
That's good to check. Is this the considered sign you do that when you ask me to check? Really? I know a sign. That's my first sign. They're breaking up? How do you know?
She reads lips.
What are they saying now?
It's not you, it's me.
Oh my God. I just had a great idea. She could come to the party tomorrow and read Dwayne's lips for me.
What?
We bring her to the party, and she tells me what Gwen is saying about me.
She's not a novelty act, George. She's a high art for weddings and bar mitzvahs.
Look, it's a skill, just like juggling. Juggling is really showing it off.
I don't know, George. I'm not sure about this.
Did you ask her? Just ask her. Says no, pitch blue.
All right. Laura, George was wondering if...
Yeah, I'll do it.
You know, the whole idea of taking the car service was so I wouldn't have to fight the traffic on Friday night. I know, I'm late. Hey, now I know two sides. Check and late. Hey, this is my friend you helped become the first ball man.
She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Guys, you made it!
Hey,
Hey, buddy!
Sorry to hear about Gwen. What, why, did she say something to you about why she broke up with you?
Oh, no, tonight will be the first chance I've had to talk to her.
Really?
Look, George, I'm friends with both of you, but I can't betray her confidence by telling you anything.
I wouldn't hear of it, Tom. It's none of my business. But you should try and find out everything you possibly can. In fact, I'll even stay all the way over on the other side of the room, just so there's no chance of me overhearing everything.
You are so centered.
Man, grown up. Oh my God, this is, go ahead, go ahead. All right, what did it say?
Hi, Gwen, hi, Ty.
High tide?
Hi, Ty. You got something between your teeth. No, that's what he said. That's interesting. I love carrots, but I hate carrot soup. And I hate peas, but I love pea soup. So do I.
This is all wild. Can I borrow her for a few hours tomorrow afternoon?
No, I lend it to you, I have to lend it to everybody.
I don't envy you, Todd. This place is gonna be a mess.
Well, maybe you can stick around after everybody leaves and we can sleep together.
Why don't you stick around and we can sleep together?
You want me to sleep with you? I don't want to sleep alone. He says, I don't want to sleep alone. She says, oh boy. Loved it. All right, that's it.
So, you get rid of me another tour, you were gonna sleep together?
What? You're crazy.
What? You're crazy.
I heard your whole conversation.
How?
I can read lips. You said, let's sleep together.
No, I didn't. I said sweep. Let's sweep together. You know, like with a broom. Cleaning up.
Sweet?
Yes.
Yes, sweet.
Sweep.
George says no.
Had it.
George is saying
Had it. Would you stop saying it? What? They said sleep together, you idiots, not sleep together.
look, I know.
I'm not sure how tightly that's related to the content of the class. Yeah. Easy to misunderstand though, isn't it?
Mm.
So yeah, having the right data is obviously crucial, and often one of the points at which conflict will start. The last category, structure, it's limited to physical, if there is limited physical resources like time or money, if there's authority issues, geographical constraints, organisational structures. So we might think in terms of limited resources, we might think in terms of authority problems, So they result when people try to resolve an issue but don't have the authority to actually make it happen. So someone may argue with the person at a checkout for a refund, for example, when it's the manager who authorises refunds. Yeah, Telstra. Let's not talk about Telstra Centrelink. And then organisational structures, divergent priorities can emerge between departments, for example, causing conflict. So all this stuff is going on, all these varying elements happening, some of which are accessible, some of which aren't. And we're saying, look at the interests. You want to identify the full range of interests of each party. Again, not always knowable, and especially if someone doesn't want you to know. But if we can look at the conflicting interests, and then perhaps also look at what some common interests are. Just pulling people, I guess, a little bit out of that locked binary positions. And to remember it is interests, especially those common interests, that are key things to focus on in seeking to resolve conflict. So in the church, especially if you've got values like dignity or respect, I think that would be a good place to start in saying, okay, we don't have to even get to a point necessarily where we agree, but can we at least agree to treat each other with some dignity and respect? And I think at that point you've just made a massive leap, but it's not until you get people out of that sort of horn-locked fight sometimes that they're able to step back and start to, okay, let's establish some rules. So as I said at the start, we're going to learn to fight better. And then we might need to work our way back, through are there structural issues here that maybe can be resolved with the help of a third party, that perhaps being you. Very mindful of the whole triangling thing that Grant said too. So you do want to step into this space in a very conscious way as a mediator and not get triangled. See if you can help people clarify facts sometimes and slowly work through the issues together. A very well-known and common model of conflict, probably more conflict prevention ideally, and maintaining healthy relationships is around boundaries. Is there anyone who hasn't heard of the boundary language? Has it so, from what I know, it's sort of so far entered our lexicon that we talk about it. So the boundary model is similar to the circle model in that it can assess the root cause of conflict from a structural and behavioural point of view, and it suggests that conflict occurs because of how people relate and interact with boundaries. So when we were in ministry, we had a boundary that we didn't want people to just come around to our house unannounced. That didn't seem unreasonable to me, but that's not everyone's understanding. So people would just turn up, and when you're already working 80 hours a week, which isn't probably healthy. Sorry?
Boundaries.
Yeah, so there's boundaries right there. The last thing you need when you're trying to unwind for the night is someone turning up at 9 o'clock on your doorstep. So this was, this is the first year of our ministry, and we had to figure out what are our boundaries and how do we maintain them. So, a typical bad way of doing that is to talk to, maybe it's not a bad way, but one way of managing, I suppose, is just to talk to the whole congregation and say, we've got this boundary and this is how it works. But the reality was there was one couple and one group of people who were doing this, and we really only needed to say it to them, and that was that, and it was solved. And you know, early days of ministry, you build it up in your mind to be this massive thing, and in the end it was two fairly easy conversations just to say, if there's an issue, and it can wait until the next day, any time from 9 o'clock onwards, you know, call or text us then, and we can deal with it. If it can't wait, then give us a call, and we'll work out what we do. And over the years, you know, we've been fairly available night and day. There's really only been a handful of occasions where people have bothered us outside of hours. I wouldn't even say really bothered us. You know, there's some big issue going on, and we're the ministers and we care about them, and we want to know and do something about it and be involved. Sometimes it's just a call to ask or a text to, can you please pray? You know, when death has been involved, or serious illness, or other big drama. Look, I'll be honest, yeah, I reckon 8 out of 10 times people just wait till the next day. They don't even, you know, want to call you in the middle of the night and have you come around. They're dealing with it themselves. But when they do, it's kind of nice to know and be able to jump in. So our lives are filled with boundaries of many kinds. Some are self-enforced, like the ones I was just talking about then, but also things like laws and rules, contracts, cultural expectations and norms, are all there to set healthy limits and could be considered boundaries. It suggests that conflict occurs, this model suggests that conflict occurs when parties disagree on boundaries, expand or break boundaries, or refuse to accept the authority and jurisdiction inherent in a boundary. It also offers a specific approach to work with conflict caused by boundary issues. Is there anyone who hasn't heard of the idea of boundaries yet? So is it Townsend? Is that the guy who wrote the book? Peter Townsend? Yeah. So I think it was pretty big in the 90s here in Australia. Everyone seemed to have read the book, Boundaries. It's language that we've found you can use in just about any church or ministry setting. And I think even if you haven't read the book, it's sort of almost self-evident, you know, to talk in terms of boundaries and say, look, we just need to establish some healthy boundaries there. I think another good thing to think about when it comes to boundaries is that you do need to set healthy boundaries to protect yourself, but you don't want to think it's this dialectic sort of thing where it's us and them. It can actually be really helpful if you've got healthy boundaries for other people, in that you're modelling healthy boundaries so they can see, oh, it's okay, I can have boundaries too, and set limits to how people access me, so to speak. But you don't want to be in ministry the saviour and rescue people all the time to a point that they're unhelpfully dependent upon you. And I think that's where having boundaries is actually helpful for the other person as well, that it's often not going to kill them to sit in their issue and think it through, and when they eventually do get the opportunity to talk with you, they're probably in a better headspace, maybe less emotional, and had a little bit of a chance to process things and maybe make better use of their time with you, because your time and energy are limited, and if they can come to that meeting having processed it a little bit themselves, then perhaps they're going to be better prepared to actually have that conversation with you. We like shapes and lines, don't we? And talk about conflict resolution. This is the triangle of satisfaction. So within this model, result interests focus on outcomes. Anyone outcome driven here? Yeah? Process interests focus on how a result is achieved. We got any process orientated people as well? No? I love process. Makes it so clear. This is how it's going to work. Let's set up a process. And emotional interests focus on the personal impact of the conflict on those involved. And I'm guessing that most of you, being good ministry people, care about how other people are experiencing conflict, their emotions, and interested in seeing it resolved in a way that's helpful and healthy for them. Sure? Yep, we're all like that, all the time. We never fail. Cool. Yeah. So it's an independent framework from the others, just one more way of thinking about conflict and conflict resolution. The model deepens the area of interests, suggesting that there are three distinct types of interest. So yeah, result, process, and emotional or psychological interests. The triangle satisfaction model offers specific strategies for working with the three different types of interests in conflict situations. So imagine a conflict between two groups, perhaps two leaders in a group, in a corps or church, over limited funding, and consider how the Salvation Army's values inform this, how this model could be enacted. So here I've got the values listed. Justice is no longer a value, so we're not espousing justice to be one of our 5 values, but obviously is. So integrity, being honest and accountable in all we do. Compassion, hearing and responding to pain with love. Respect, affirming the worth and capacity of all people. Diversity, embracing difference as a gift. And collaboration, creating partnerships in mission. So which of these values do you think informs what results are sought, or the processes by which they are reached, and the emotional well-being of those involved? I can feel the brain accolade as I talk.
Can you just repeat that
Yeah,
question?
so
It was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, so I didn't break my brain.
2 core leaders, like maybe there's you've got one group, maybe a band and a music group. That leader is having a conflict with the musical head person over limited funding. How does integrity affect the result we're seeking, the process we're using, and the emotion? What about compassion? So what do we need to know to act compassionately in that situation, do you think?
To be aware of the emotions that are impacting the conflict.
Yeah. 2 people, a couple of people that after a little while you actually get to know and care about and think, these are 2 fairly nice, reasonable people, but there's not enough money to give to both to see their program run well. So it'd be nice to think we could see that situation with compassion, but what about those 2 people too? Where's compassion as a value work in the process and the result for them? Is it all about me and my program? Yep. Gimme, gimme. I want 100% of the funding, and they should get none because my program's awesome and theirs is not. So, if we were trying to mediate that conflict, perhaps there's a need to talk about these people seeing each other as people and actually caring about what the other person's trying to achieve. maybe they need an opportunity to explain to each other why the funding is important to them. And maybe that will resolve the conflict, maybe it won't. You know, if the music person is saying we need more to update the instruments, that's not going to most likely satisfy the main music person, is it? But maybe if it's for the mainly music person, it's about being able to continue to, you know, hire a bus or maintain a bus that picks everyone up, and that's make or break for the program. All of a sudden, the musical director person just goes, yeah, you know what, that's actually more important, that's more in line with the mission and the vision of this place and what we're trying to achieve. So compassion gives us a little bit of a certain coloured lens through which to look at it. Integrity, I think, would what maybe involve being open and honest about what the drivers are for you wanting the funding. What about respect? We've already spoken about that. That at least through the conversation they're treating each other with respect. Yeah. Collaboration would be an interesting one in that space, I think.
Let's join the two.
It's working together for mutual benefit. After the break, we're going to talk about the whole idea of win-win or lose-lose and everything in between. But sometimes you can feel the pressure. You know, if you were the leader of that group and you've got to go back to the lead, you know, your team and say we did or didn't get the funding and this is what it means. You know, you might be feeling the pressure, and it's not until you can perhaps see the greater cause and be able to take that back to the group and say, hey, you know what, we didn't get the funding, but you know, I'm glad that that group did because it means this. That's, I guess, part of what it means to really understand the vision for a place and what you're trying to achieve. It's about understanding your purpose, your mission, why you even exist, and the values or the rules by which you're going to conduct yourself in trying to make this sort of stuff work. Let's go and have some coffee. And we'll press on after the break.
So.
Yeah, and I need to turn my microphone off as well. Wait a sec. Yeah, let's go from the number.
walking the dog yesterday.
Yeah, very social creatures. So as soon as anyone saw you, it's like, oh, maybe you can go and say hi. Yeah.
What a picture.
Isn't it awesome? When I had this idea that I wanted Darth, I had that much trouble just finding for me, what I would consider the perfect, iconic image. And that was it.
That's it, what I was saying.
Yeah, and that's what this model kind of is a bit about me. It's the dark side of conflict management.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, Graham. I loved the Star Wars movies growing up, and I love the Star Wars universe, but revisiting the movies, the original ones and even the more recent ones, except for maybe some of the more really, really recent ones, just a bit subpar, I reckon.
Yeah.
There's just some of it's just so, it's horrible and daggy.
I always keep in mind it was 77.
I know, and you can't judge something so long ago, by today's standards.
Yeah.
So you're right. The visuals, the technology side stuff, the inclusivity, how they carefully use things like C-3PO to include LGBTQ people. It's quite obvious.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Also the humanity of the robots. Yeah,
yes.
That's really well developed. Yeah.
Don't
My
judge.
brain's trying to
And obviously the different races of beings stand in for different races of people, and very anti-racist series really in the end. So that's very clever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Like any opinion I have right now is going to be wrong.
Unless you agree with me, in which case it's always right. In my mind. We're all the same. It's all we all believe.
Which model did you say we talked to Graham about? Integrated model, was it?
Integral theory.
Integral.
Yeah.
I need to leave at 12 to do.
Yeah, we all do.
I'll be leaving with you all.
I think I need to leave at 11:05.
If you need to go, you just go.
You are what you settle for.
Is that on Facebook?
No, Janice Joplin said it. You are only as much as you settle for.
shove it in somewhere.
If she ever.
Yes. When is my next day off? Oh, the 6th of November?
Just before the song. To the song. Have you got half the songs in?
Nope.
Have you got the
I know I have it written down.
leadership
So my next day off would be the 27th of November?
Looks like probably the song.
So the 20th of December? No, so after. Sorry, I'm just calling.
Sorry, is
The
that probably
27th
here?
of December can be my day off. I've had a healthy life balance again.
Actually, have you got anything on the
Of what?
uh,
There's a lot of months. 20 days less than April. I don't know. That's the Sunday
that's
one.
November.
Whoop. October.
It's like a.
Yes. Class.
Oh, okay.
Why?
I was going to say, because that review is actually well, so that.
No, still have enough.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are we all with conflict?
0? Yeah.
0? Is anyone higher than 0?
It depends on the conflict.
Yeah.
If it's pointless conflict, it'll be 0.
Mm.
Or what I determine to be pointless. But if it's conflict for a purpose,
Yep.
and healthy conflict, I think I'm probably a 3.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Others?
I argue with my brother just for the sake of it. It's healthy banter, it's
Yep.
good practice.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't mind doing a bit of that.
Yep.
Did you do a slack screening before?
No. I got through.
You guys are pretty
I don't mind speaking my mind.
Yep.
A little bit outspoken.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
That usually causes conflict to arise, but it's also good in that if I have conflict with others, I've got no problem saying how I feel.
Yep.
Or what I'm thinking.
Yep. Others?
I'm not great at it.
No.
I think I avoid at all costs.
Yeah.
I'd be prepared. Oh well, I tend to withdraw and just do anything I possibly can to
Yep.
not have conflict.
Yep. I think that'd be a very common response to conflict.
I think if it impacts me directly and I have issues with it,
Yep.
if it's two people that I need to then engage in that, I don't care.
So that's good. So that leads into our second question. So how comfortable are you resolving conflict with others? So are you more comfortable with resolving conflict with others than having it yourself, or less?
If I feel supported, so if my whole team would be on board with what I'm addressing,
Yep.
I think I'd be more comfortable to address the conflict. Whereas if I'm the lone person that's disagreeing with somebody, I'm
Yep.
less likely to speak up.
Yep. Also probably depends whether the conflict's over an issue or person. So is it, we're fighting over resources, so we're kind of, at least to some extent you can say, the conflict is over this thing, whereas if it's a breakdown in relationship and the conflict is between two people and how they see each other, I don't know about you, but I think I feel differently about the two, and how I'd be involved in resolving it. It's good to be aware of how you feel around conflict and how that's going to likely influence how you want to resolve conflict. conflict or whether you want to resolve conflict. And sometimes you might be in a team where you don't have to be that person. Other times you might be, and that might be really difficult. You might, really dread doing it, or you might be quite comfortable with it. And not everything requires you stepping in, but sometimes the line is crossed, a boundary is crossed, then you feel compelled to. And you think, well, even if I don't like it, I think I've got to do this, or at least it needs to be done, whether you're the person or not, I guess. Yeah, that's yet to be determined. This next model, interests, rights, power model, sort of reminds me a bit of the great man theory, leadership thing. It's like, it's not good, but this is how most people operate, so we've got to understand it. So interests, rights, power model. Rage Against the Machine with an orchestra. How cool is that?
Yep, that's one word for it.
Yeah. If you remember anything from this whole class or course, it'll be Darth Vader staring you down.
Nothing.
So Gary Furlong said that this model is a foundational framework used in conflict resolution, in the conflict resolution field. In many ways, it underpins the entire field of conflict resolution and negotiation. That's big. It doesn't access the root causes of conflict, it rather focuses on the different processes people use to deal with conflict, categorising all approaches to conflict as being one of three types: interest-based, rights-based, or power-based. So the interest-based processes refer to the parties' wants, needs, hopes and fears. Interest-based approaches are wanting to be more consensual and succeed when both parties get enough of the interests met to agree on the solution. So the win-win situation. Maybe it's the sharing of the funding, for example. Rights-based process. This is an approach that is characterised by parties asserting or focusing on the superiority of one party's rights over the rights of another party. As mentioned earlier, rights come from many sources, including laws, statutes, conventions, past practices, policies, contracts, etc. Rights-based processes tend to be adversarial and focus on promoting one's own rights, of minimising and delegitimising the other party's rights. So it's the win-lose model. This is all quoted directly from Gary Furlong. I'll upload this presentation at the end of sometime today, and you'll have access to it. And then the power-based processes. This approach is characterised by parties bringing to be all the resources they have at their disposal against the other party in an attempt to win. That for me is the Death Star in Star Wars. It's you will bow to me and my power, and I will get what I want. I will destroy you if I need to. And we laugh, but that's a very well-used conflict resolution approach in the real world. Typically, power-based processes are highly adversarial and are sometimes applied in spite of the rights of the parties. Sometimes they win-lose, sometimes they can be lose-lose. sometimes it is I will destroy you and myself if necessary just to make sure you do not get your way. So pretty horrible, but just part of reality and living in the real world. The dynamics of trust model. This model looks at the dynamics of trust and how we attribute blame. It's quite nice, isn't it? The model also gives the practitioner specific strategies to rebuild enough trust to facilitate the resolution process. Because often trust is what has been broken in a relationship that's led to the conflict. And that's done through activities such as confidence building measures, procedural trust, and attributional retraining. Now, one, where are we? What was I going to say? A simple definition of trust is having positive expectations about another's motives and intentions towards us when potential risk is involved. This includes not only motives and intentions, but also the other person's capability and competency. Today, in the wake of Brene Brown's research and popularity, we might be more inclined to use the word vulnerability, I thought, as well. What do you think? Is that fair? Instead of trust, and I think there's obviously substantial research to indicate that being genuine or authentic and vulnerable with people is horrible because it's just so hard and no one wants to do it. But it builds trust. That feeds into the dynamic of trust in a relationship. And when we think of the circle of that circle model, the things that are inaccessible to us, if you can be vulnerable and trust someone in conflict, I think it's disarming because well, as long as they're not sort of horrible and going to use their power-based approach to just mow you down, but you allow people to see something they can't otherwise. If you can be vulnerable, you can say where you're coming from, you can say how your moods may have affected things, how external factors that are inaccessible to them you can make accessible to them, you can share your values, you can be honest about the relationship with the person perhaps. And maybe if you're facilitating the process and have enough rapport with the people involved, there's room to encourage that if you are confident that it's not going to be abused, that if you can build trust between two people who are in conflict, or between yourself and someone else if you're in conflict with them, and I think being authentic and vulnerable can be part of that, then I think you're more likely to make headway. Because at the end of the day, almost everything we do, it really comes down to relationships.
So I think my question with that, because in theory it sounds lovely, but a lot of conflict is from broken trust. So you're already kind of in this messy relationship, and then there's emotions that go into that, hurt, blah, blah, blah. How do you rebuild trust with someone enough to kind of rebuild the relationship when the reason the relationship isn't there is because they or you broke the trust to begin with?
I think, like anything with a relationship, I think it takes some effort on behalf of both parties. So if someone's proven themselves to be untrustworthy and has hurt you, unless you're Superman or Superwoman, emotionally, I think we all reach a point where we can't continue to put ourselves in a damaging position where we're going to be hurt and re-hurt infinitely. So it's hard. Yeah, I think we all operate out of limited resources and limited ability to do what we want to do or would consider the right thing to do is. And there's so many factors. So it's hard to give an absolute answer. If it was broken trust in a core relationship over many years, that's very different to something that's going to affect you less in a ministry setting, I think. So if it's a loved one, then I think we can quite quickly reach the limits of what we're capable of doing in restoring and resolving that conflict and restoring a relationship. Whereas if we're not as invested, it's someone who we minister to and it's not such a close relationship, perhaps we have more capacity. I don't think that probably fully answers the question. I think it's very context driven. But I think it's important to acknowledge that it's just hard and sometimes we're not able to get where we want to get. But not to sort of then just write that off either. There just needs to be a healthy tension, and I think only we can determine that on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, sometimes if we've been really hurt, it becomes hard, if not impossible, for us, and maybe we do need some support in the form of a mediator, for example. Just want to make a brief note on something called attribution theory in relation to this model. Attribution theory is a cornerstone in the broader discipline of psychology, and it offers some helpful insights, I think, for those seeking to resolve conflict. It's one of those very helpful things to be aware of in yourself. So attribution theory states that people have a tendency to attribute causes of behaviour in particular ways. So listen carefully to this. When we consider that we may be the potential cause of a negative effect, we have a strong tendency to attribute the cause to the situation. When we perceive someone else to be the cause of the negative effect, we have a strong tendency to ignore or at least minimise the situational factors and attribute the cause to the intrinsic nature or bad intentions of the other person. So if I knocked the glass off the table, maybe it was too close to the edge. Or maybe I wouldn't say I knocked the glass off the table, maybe I'd say the glass was knocked off the table. If you knock the glass off the table, you're lazy, or stupid, or clumsy, or careless. That's attribution theory. What am I attributing the cause of the negative effect to?
Is that just blaming?
Yeah. But we do exactly the same thing. We don't blame ourselves. There's
always blaming something else.
There's factors. There was a reason why it happened, and it may not be my fault, but we're not so quickly to try and get someone else off the hook. It's probably them, you know. That's for most people. That's part of one of the things I learned in organisational behaviour class years ago, and there's a whole bunch of research around it. So it's a pretty sort of robust thing. Now that you've heard it, listen to how people talk when things go wrong. You will hear people, and part of it, even some of that's in fairness to other cultures, sometimes it's a bit of an East and Western thing as well, to say, yeah, the glass was knocked off the table, or the bicycle broke, rather than I knocked the glass off the table, I broke the bicycle. And that's okay, both are true, just different ways of seeing and saying it. But be mindful of how quick we can be, how quick you can be to go, that person did that, and therefore it probably means this. Whereas if you did the same thing, you might hope someone might be able to extend a little bit more grace.
Yeah, I think you hear that with children.
Mm-hmm.
It does stand out a lot more. But you find yourself doing the same thing as well.
Yeah, it is. It's just a funny little quirky thing in human nature, I think. It's good to name and be aware of. So in the dynamics of trust diagnosis model here, we can see that there's an event where trust is lost. So situation, attributions, looks at the circumstances, intrinsic nature, the personal nature of the person, so again, what we were just talking about, and sometimes even goes as far as it being intentional or hostile. The person did it because they're a bad person, they're evil. I'd hope most of us don't jump that quickly to...
Is that kind of like a sociopath kind of area though? Or like those crazy people that just they can't filter?
Yeah, I think they would be constantly in that. I think a lot of people can, maybe not the evil part, but I think most of us can get to the negative, hostile, hurtful motives, you know, especially in some of the angry rhetoric you might see in social media, that's typical of some groups. You go, oh, seriously? But then it's quite easy then for you to attribute that to them as well and not be able to take a step back and go, well, maybe there's other factors that might not be intrinsic to their nature. It might be the way they've been taught to see the world. So again, just one more tool, I think, to try and get out of our own shoes and see something from the vantage point of someone else. And the classic example that springs to mind for me is that the poor are poor because they're lazy. Feel everyone's blood pressure in the room, eyes. Yeah. So yeah, they're lazy. It's their fault would be a hostile way of seeing it almost, or that at least it's because they're not that smart or motivated. So it's just part of their personal nature. We're ignoring sort of system failure or circumstances, tragedies. You know, maybe their loved one died at the same time they were developing a mental health issue, and then they lost their job, they might have been retrenched. All these things come together and all of a sudden someone's homeless. Yeah, that's a little bit different to talking about this in relation to conflict and trust, but it then can become a cause of conflict. This is called the next model, a dimensions model. It takes the broadest look at diagnosing conflict by proposing that conflict takes place along 3 dimensions, being the cognitive or perceptual dimension, the emotional dimension, and the behavioural dimension. So in the cognitive dimension, we perceive and think about the conflict. Emotional dimension, obviously, how we feel, and the behavioural dimension, how we act or what we do about the conflict. So it's not, yeah, I'm sure you can see that there, you know, sometimes it can be something that just triggers an emotional response in someone, and it can be very difficult at that point to think well about it at all if you're so hurt. Which levels of these 3 dimensions are accessible to us?
Like from someone else?
Yeah, within yourself and within others.
I think to an extent, all of them are accessible to ourselves, but when I'm in the middle of conflict, my emotional response, or my understanding of my emotional response may not be really accurate. Or even how I'm thinking about the conflict, like it all can get a bit. But when it's to others, I find that if you're trying to resolve conflict, that they may tell you what they think you want to hear and what they think you want them to be feeling and all of that. So like emotional, you could potentially never know how they're actually feeling.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can't control how they act. You can encourage them, but you can't control.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's insightful.
I think to some degree we can only change the behavioural, like thoughts come into our head out of nowhere. It's not necessarily controlling the thoughts, it's what we do with them. And same with emotions as well. We can feel overwhelmed by emotions and not know why, but it's what we do with that.
Yeah. Yep. I've heard people after conflict say they weren't aware that their behaviour was inappropriate. They're just so overridden with emotion that in their mind they will say they were unaware that their behaviour was inappropriate. Whether that's true or not, I suppose. How is that accessible to us? Often it's only the behaviour of someone else that's accessible to us. We infer from their behaviour that they are feeling a certain way about it, which is possibly quite accurate. Maybe it's not. From what they're saying, we might understand or think we understand how they think about the issue. But again, if their emotions are overriding their ability to articulate themselves well, perhaps it's a fairly poor understanding. And then it largely depends on how self-aware we are, I suppose. Whether we can say, you know, these are my pure thoughts on the matter, if an emotional response has been triggered within me. Do my moods of that moment affect what lens I'm looking through and how I perceive the issue, and therefore think about it and feel about it? So there's probably a bit more going on than we often realise. But it can, again, I think it'd be a helpful tool just to sort of be aware. Yeah, how aware am I myself in conflict, or when other people are in conflict, about what the real issues are, how we feel about that, and how we're behaving. And behaviour is probably the most accessible dimension in this, and one we can usually address with a bit more certainty. So that's where I think we come back to things like respect and dignity, and suggest, well, I appreciate you feel or think a certain way about this. This is how we're going to behave in trying to resolve the conflict. This is the social style model. This model focuses on understanding personal conflict and conflict related to personal communication styles. It suggests 4 basic personality and communication styles or types, and offers clear skills and strategies to working with these personality characteristics in conflict resolution. So you've got task directed and people directed at the top and the bottom there, and then you've got ask directed and tell directed running horizontally. And I'll give you a minute just to read that and see if you can make sense of what it's saying. tell me if you think you can plot yourself on that table too.
On the amiable,
Mm-hmm.
more persuasive,
Yep.
more attractive. Yeah.
Might be somewhere between analytical and amiable.
Can that be seen as manipulative rather than being upfront and direct?
I suppose I think most things there's a sort of a shadow side
To everything, yeah.
to it, and perhaps a good place that it comes from. But yeah, it could be. Anyone else? Where would you sit on that?
Analytical.
Yep.
Because I guess there can be good motivation and other motivation for each of them too, couldn't there?
For sure.
Like, particularly I'm thinking of the analytical, you could have a positive motivation to act in that way, or you could have a negative motivation to act that way.
Yeah. Yep. If you look at something like analytical, be careful not to commit too quickly. The tendency there might be not to commit quickly enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, or at all, that's right.
But then sometimes you can rush in and try and fix things too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes
Right.
it's worth taking the time about it.
Yeah.
So that everyone's happy in the end, rather
Mhm.
than feeling that they're being forced to make a decision too soon.
Yeah. If you're a member of a team, you might have people at different ends of the spectrum. One's going like, we've really got to get onto this in the next 24 hours, and the other's like, wait a second, we need to, get the facts and find out really what's going on here and formulate a strategy. So and you might even find that tension within yourself sometimes too, mightn't you? You might be thinking, I do need to get onto this and say something in the next 24 hours. But by the same token, I don't have all the facts and I need to get all the facts. And something like this is, for me, is such a clear indicator of how different people just go to different leaders and lead differently in different situations, and that there's never going to be a simple right or wrong response. That sometimes, the way you're naturally wired is going to be the right way. Sometimes you're going to have to really challenge yourself and go, yeah, I really just want this sorted. And then what if there's external pressures? I might be going on furlough for 4 weeks overseas, that, and something just massive blows up 2 days out or something, and now you're going to be really wanting to get it somewhat resolved, if it's resolvable, or not.
Too focused on holiday.
Yeah, there you go. Your body's in the office, but your mind's out the door. And, yeah.
Whereas I'd moved into driver and try to get things done before I
You're already like, I'll sort it out when I get back.
Yeah, so exactly, so there's so many factors, have we got someone to delegate to? Yes, maybe, no, perhaps, who knows? So yeah, lots of different things pulling us in different directions with some of this stuff. The next model is called Moving Beyond Conflict. Yes, and one of the main barriers to conflict resolution comes when people can't let conflict go. They can't move on with their lives. A dispute can become such an important part of an individual's life that he or she will not allow it to end. It feels as if something important is being lost if they move on. It's very similar in some ways to the process of grieving, and the Moving Beyond model helps identify the stages or steps parties often must go through in order to let it go and move on. So this is what the model looks like. So not unfamiliar to grief models. There's this sense of denial, then anger, then acceptance. I suggest it's probably a bit more involved than that most often, but as far as a model, a framework to think about it, we can think in these broad terms of this sense of denial. What does denial involve? Denial of any significant contribution or responsibility for the problem, denial of even being a party to the conflict at all, acknowledging they did anything wrong, asserting that the other party's wrongdoing dwarfs their own and makes it irrelevant, attributing all blame to the other party and ignoring or minimising any actions for information that contradicts that blame, refusing to accept that this problem will or should change their life in any way, shape or form. So in denial we live in a world where it really isn't our problem, where the reality of the situation has not sunk in. When it dawns on us that yes, this is my problem to deal with, that it isn't going away and that it is going to change my life, anger can often quickly follow. Then, so need to work through the anger and then hopefully arrive at a place of acceptance. And this can mean a number of things. Accepting that they are part of the problem and need to participate in resolving it. Accepting that they contributed to the problem in some way and that they acknowledge that to the other side. Accepting that they want this over with and that they can move on. One of those things that's not so difficult to understand but incredibly difficult to practice and sometimes just takes time.
And it's quite hard to recognise this sort of thing when you're in the middle of it.
Sure
or
is.
even just watching it within two people to go, this is what's going on. It's quite hard to see.
I remember reading Daniel Goleman's Emotional Intelligence, must be coming up to 20 years ago, and he was explaining that when in the brain, when the amygdala's triggered, it's something called an amygdala hijack, where the emotional part of your brain is overloading, almost like an electrical storm, any ability for the cerebral cortex, and like the thinking apparatus of our brain. So to try and get a logical thought into the brain at that point, I'm not sure if it's his analogy or mine, but it's akin to, like, you know when you see a burst fire hydrant, it's just water spurting out. It's trying to put something down that hole. It's just not gonna happen. Once the amygdala has hijacked your brain, so that's Goleman's term, amygdala hijack. It's you literally cannot think straight. You literally cannot think logically. So if you've had an emotional response that's caused you to deny something or cause great hurt or grief or anger, you're just not in a place to start to reason yourself into accepting things as they are. And you know, we're all humans, we've all been there. It's horrible. And yeah, like I said, sometimes it just takes time.
Sometimes with the acceptance from the behavioural and conflict model, you said we need to accept that we're partly to blame. There are some situations where you're actually not.
It's true.
It's got nothing to do with the reason for the conflict.
Yep.
But somehow that acceptance that it has happened needs to be there.
Yeah, it's true. I think some of the way Indigenous people have been treated in this country, I think we would all agree is horrible. It took me a while to get my head around what it means to say sorry as someone who hadn't consciously done anything wrong. And saying sorry was more than I'm sorry for your grief in a way that you might say at a funeral. You know, you say I'm sorry for your loss. You're not saying you had anything to do with the person's death. You're just saying I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to see you going through that. But you know, Max was really helpful in helping me to understand that saying sorry was deeper than that. But it wasn't at the same time taking full responsibility for the situation. That as an Anglo-Saxon person that I had acknowledged, I guess, that the country that I benefit from was built upon other people's suffering. I'm really sorry to know that that's happened and that in ways that I have and haven't consciously participated in the disenfranchisement of Indigenous people and continue to, I'm sorry. It takes time to work through that, and in a conflict that you're actually affected with, so you get past the emotional stuff. Sometimes you do have to ask yourself, well, what am I saying sorry for? Like, am I sorry because I actually did something wrong, or am I sorry that this person feels wrong and that I was somehow involved in that, even though they and me maybe could even say it's not my fault per se. And at what point there's sometimes someone blaming you that you've just not at all done? There's just simply no wrongdoing, but someone feels that there is.
I'm not sure that society sees sorry as anything other than it's my fault, I'm sorry. Because I know I say I'm sorry a lot to other people when I see that they're hurting, and straight away the response is, well, it's got nothing to do with you. It's always like, well, you shouldn't be sorry because it's not your fault.
Yeah.
So I think society is very big at saying, you know, if you say sorry, you're saying that it's your fault, that you're responsible for the situation.
Sorry to me is another word like love that's just inadequate in capturing something that we feel and mean. That, you know, the Greeks had 7 words, I think, for love. That go so much further towards expressing truly what you mean when you say I love someone or something. Sorry is just one of those inadequate words that doesn't capture a very complex phenomenon. And I do think it's largely misunderstood. I think forgiveness is another word that's often misunderstood in similar ways. It's just one of the failings of language, and I mean, we sort of spoke about this bit in the social constructionism class, but when I say something or I try and communicate an idea, how do I know you're hearing it in the same way and now we're thinking the same, we're talking about the same thing? No, it, and in fact can be a million miles away, and another great cause of conflict, so it's tricky. When I did a unit called Reconciliation as part of my Bachelor of Theology, I sat in the class and tried to formulate some sort of understanding of what reconciliation was. This was back pre-iPad days and in the old days.
Oh wow, actual paper.
Yeah, that's my messy, tiny handwriting. And the purpose of showing you this isn't for you to see and understand my model so much as to encourage you to formulate your own understanding and models around some of this. I was sort of just taking notes throughout the entire class. The lecture was really boring, and so I was writing, I wrote 5 pages over the course of the unit on how to teach and not teach. I'm not sure how well I've done with that. And then on this third sort of note-taking page, I was just trying to build an understanding of what reconciliation actually is. And obviously there's some pretty clear links between reconciliation and conflict resolution. So a question I'd put to you is, do you have a model of conflict resolution, explicit or implicit? I'd suggest we all probably, at the very least, have an implicit model of conflict resolution. And what does it look like? You know, when the rubber hits the road and there's actually conflict, what do we do? And that's going to vary, isn't it? You know, if it's a conflict at home, a conflict in the church. How do we deal with it? And there would be the ideal model where you try and map out, like I did in that class. This is how conflict resolution would ideally work. And this is what I actually do, for better or worse. I shut down, I stonewall, I get aggressive, and I go on the counter-attack. What's actually happening for you when conflict occurs? And I think when we get to that point where you go, well, I guess this is actually what's happening, maybe that's the point at which we can start to intelligently do something about it. But what I was saying before about the amygdala hijack, you don't stand much chance of writing the model when conflict is occurring. And in your busy non-stop lives, unless you intentionally put some time aside to think about what this is and how it works, it's probably not going to change. The reality is, I think conflict resolution is one of the most important things we do in leadership. It definitely shapes the culture of a place, how conflict is dealt with, or whether it's dealt with or not dealt with. You kind of need some sort of strategy around conflict resolution if it's going to happen well. And I'd suggest it's one of the things that's really worth investing some time into. You might feel like you don't have time to do it now, and you know, I respect you all enough as adults to hear that. If that's the case, you're probably right. But some little note somewhere or reminder to pop up at some point and go, yeah, alright, so I kind of, and it might be just as simple as finding one of the models that we've covered today that really resonates with you and just saying, that's what I'll do, and you just do it. But it might need to be bigger and broader than that as well. I'm going to just watch a little 1-minute video I found on conflict. I think it's just 1 minute.
What is it about conflict that makes it so difficult to deal with, and how come good people can turn into such monsters in the face of conflict? The most common way of dealing with conflict is to avoid it. Some people walk away, others get really upset, wind themselves up and attack, and others just get sick or go on stress leave. In fact, it's amazing what people will do in order to avoid conflict and the emotional stress that comes with it. There is a very clever saying that goes like this: denial is not a river in Egypt. Denial is, however, one of the most common problems when it comes to resolving conflict. When confronted with a tense or difficult conflict, too many people smooth it over, bury their head in the sand, and the conflict goes on for another 1, 2, or 3 weeks, months, or even years in some cases. I want to introduce you to a definition of conflict and then give you a pathway for the resolution of conflict. Before I do, I want to say this. For some people, even the word conflict means warfare, dead bodies and blood on the streets, and it's very common for women and men to see anything less than that as not being in conflict at all. So this is a definition that starts at a very low level because most conflict starts out as very small upsets and builds and grows into a full-scale battle. So here's the definition. Conflict exists when one person has a need of another and that need is not being met. Now don't be fooled by the simplicity of this definition. The resolution of conflict starts from here, and the first step is to express the need. The second step is to find out if the need can or cannot be met. If the need can be met, then we have resolution. If it's a no, then we negotiate to resolve the conflict or we go into the management of conflict. So here's the problem. Most people go straight from having an unmet need into the management of conflict, bypassing step 1 and step 2 because they are afraid and don't talk to the people who can do something about it, and that's not pretty. In fact, it gets quite ugly. So here's what the management of conflict looks like. Sulking, withdrawing, getting sick, the silent treatment, backstabbing, gossiping, shouting, blocking, being aggressive, and getting angry. So the resolution of conflict starts with expressing your unmet need and then finding out if your unmet need can or cannot be met. If your conflict has escalated to the stage where it's too tough or sensitive or difficult to handle, then you really need to think seriously about involving a neutral third party to help you mediate the dispute, and we can help you out with that. For more information, please call me, Jeff Muir, on 1300 555 635.
We should turn it on.
Put it on speaker.
One of the things you didn't mention, which you did, is how reasonable people are when we're talking about conflict. So some people can be quite reasonable and you could mediate conflict, but I don't know about you, but when I think about conflict, I have a gut reaction that I'm going to be dealing with unreasonable people or an unreasonable person, that we're not actually going to be able to sit down and have a conversation that is full of people treating each other with respect, that someone's going to storm out or get very upset and yell, and there's just going to be further hurt. So I always feel in conflict management that I'm trying to dismantle a bomb, and it might just blow up in my face at any point. Probably the vast majority of cases that's not happening, and that's not to do with me, that's to do with people. Most people are reasonably okay in talking and in conflict. But there can be, if you talk about it, it's different with children than it is with adults. It's different if there's mental health issues, of course. If it's real make or break circumstances, like someone's homeless and you're going to either find them somewhere to stay that night or not. If there's further complicating factors, like they've got kids, all of a sudden the stakes can raise quite quickly, as will your own anxiety around managing or resolving the conflict. It's hard work sometimes, but it's also easy for us to build it up to be something bigger than it is sometimes as well. So I think you do need to start with a naive, what's the word? A consciously naive hope that this can be resolved. So what I'm hopeful, but not unrealistically so. So naive in your actions.
You've got to expect the worst, though, don't you?
You hope for the best, prepare for the worst, sort of thing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, expect the worst, but don't approach it from that angle.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. This is exactly it. This is what's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
That, yeah, how do we, whether we're involved or it's and other parties, you know, if they're known to be unreasonable or reasonable, that massively changes the dynamic as well. So if you're sitting down with two very self-aware, mature adults, that's very different to some of those other instances where, you know, there's factors that are going to complicate it and maybe make that nice amicable conversation less likely. But if you're sort of, my fear is that if you approach it expecting it to blow up, you're not going to give it the full chance that it might have had if you'd approached it with that.
With the possibility of it could go well.
Yeah.
Or it could be an opportunity for growth, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So, my mind jumps to Fowler's Stages of Faith, where in the last stage or two it talks about this, it talks about a new naivety in approaching some of the mythological elements of faith and biblical theology. So that's where I'm getting this word naive from, that I know is out of place and not quite right in this context. Part of me saying don't use that word.
It's just open-mindedness to the possibility that things could be good.
And then enacting it naively in a good way, that you know it might not work out, but that's the hope and that's the chance that you're going to give it. Now, hear me when, like, if it's a relationship where there's a lot of broken trust and difficulty, you might need to be a little bit more guarded than that and not put yourself in a position of, you know, potential horrible hurt or something. So it's not this, do this all the time, like I'm sure you can hear that. But, yeah, giving it every chance we can as well. There's just a knife edge at where I think good conflict resolution works. You'd have to take something of a chance. There's an element of risk and vulnerability that's not often going to sit comfortably with us when we're really, really, really in it. But I think that's the springboard from where good conflict resolution can work. Who wants to talk about self-differentiation in conflict management? Who remembers what self-differentiation is? Siri, what's self-differentiation?
Defining yourself and staying in touch with others. It's not losing yourself in a conversation, so still staying true to you and your own values that might be different to the other person, but still approaching it as you not trying to be them.
Yeah. So can we say anything on how that works with conflict resolution?
I think when it's a values conflict, and if you're conflicting just because it's two different personalities, it's hard because it would be easier just to say that you agree with them and move on. But you might be ending on like the disagreeing, but agreeing to disagree. I don't know.
Yeah.
You're not compromising yourself, your values.
But somehow coming to a middle ground.
Yeah.
But still staying with your own values.
Yeah.
Maybe conflict resolution is about change of some sort, but it can't be change of who you actually are as a person. You've got to choose what you change.
Yeah.
You know, some things you need to say, okay, yes, I'm willing to change this, and some things you've got to be prepared to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't change that. That's who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. It's finding that healthy sense of self. That this is who I am. This is what it means to be authentically me and live by what I believe. But at the same time, I'm genuinely open to hearing what others have to say. So maybe there's a humility in that. What a horrible word, humility. Maybe I don't know everything. Maybe I don't have all the information. Maybe I've made some errors of judgment. This is all hypothetical.
Yeah, there we go. Waiting.
And if I talk with someone and actually hear what they've got to say and think and how they feel, that I might come to a new understanding. The other, we spoke about it before, but the other great moment of truth for me in some of the stuff Grant spoke about, it was reframing. I think that's just hugely valuable in conflict resolution. You know, how is another person seeing the issue? I would sort of talk about the same thing but different. And how do we move forward from there? Maybe. I printed off a case study which was in the Geelong textbook, maybe in groups of 2 or 3. Have a quick read of it yourself, and then we'll just break into groups of 2 or 3. And we'll if your brain's not all fired up to deal with this on a Monday morning straight back from break, I'll be happy for you to sort of just come up with your own basic conflict scenario between a couple of people and just pick a model. You can choose any model. If everyone picks the same model, that'll be fine.
Like one of the ones you just talked about?
Yeah, one of the ones from this morning. Maybe use one of the simpler models. Maybe even I'll choose a model for you. How does that sound? Maybe we'll go with it. I like this one. So let's just look at a simple model like the dimensions model. once you finish reading, if you want to just grab one or two other people, and using this model, what's going on? And if you were asked to help mediate a solution, or at least map a way forward, what would you do? Do you want me to pair you up, or do you want to do it yourself?
Comparing it with the dimensions.
Yeah, just see if you can diagnose what's going on. We'll just everyone will report back to the group, just a dot point or two or three about what's going on, and then saying about what sort of response might be required. So I'll set a timer for 5 minutes. We'll see how far we get in 5 minutes. Are you three happy to talk together? Are you two happy to do it? You're ministry team anyway, so. Sorry?
They need something else to
you'll shine.
Yeah, they need something to keep their focus on themselves.
So you think the issue is Bob, or was it
And Sally came in and
what role being created for
dealt with what.
I think there's a lot of issues. I think
Sally the boss was
I
like,
wonder, like, there's a lot of things in there
Diane's one.
where Bob complains that he was never offered acting supervisor assigned to training manager and occupational under the service or training that's why he wasn't promoted. And so I'm wondering if
one year.
like this service sort of stuff that's happening with that. He hasn't felt like his role is very emotional being seen. And now it's come to a day when someone who is more qualified than him is probably going to be there.
which I don't think is the
I
model
will
we're looking at.
just like qualified.
And
And
then
then they're similar response to that, similar training.
Well, that's probably one of the
Then when Sally's
Yeah.
put in charge,
That's
she's got all these
the outcomes
new
with behaviour
structures that
change,
you
doesn't it? That's what you're looking for the way they act.
and one of them is to streamline how approachable.
I think Sally.
So I'm not seeing anything unfair with Bob and Sally.
The only difference between the both though is that Diane's was client service.
But that's
So
pretty
it's
much what
Grind it
the,
out.
pretty much what the
Maybe one of
supervisor
the
role
other.
does.
Whereas Bob didn't get that, he got the accounting type work. So already even if not even already Bob get a should go there. Maybe unintentionally. And then they noticed the that. Whereas he never got
So
that.
I feel that this has been done to him and he had no say or anything like that, you know.
And I was saying also, he was given warnings, but
Yeah.
I don't think he was ever really heard. Yeah, that's fine.
He's becoming insubordinate.
And Diane's not, I don't think she's handling very well.
Was that angry? Was there anything? Or
Yeah, she gets angry and starts yelling and then using profanity.
I don't think they're not
Yeah,
playing
because I think
that's just because I think they're playing. I didn't even know. I wonder if it's helpful, like at least at the starting point.
she got rid of it, he did it.
Yeah.
He was comfortable.
Yeah.
And I get defensive.
Bob,
like,
Sally,
I
and
don't want to be
professional mediator in the room.
Yeah.
You know,
I
but
think so.
then he could be angry at that.
Yeah.
What Bob's expectations are, Diane's expectations, and Sally's.
They're
of
all
each
on
other.
different pages.
And then maybe even look at having Sally manage Bob rather than Diane.
You'd have to do, the line manager would have to do so. Because that's where all that
Because
comes
this
from.
is Diane's trying to line manage and be off about it.
But what would be is you're getting the
situation and themselves as well.
Yeah.
see what she can do, because she's technically his line manager, but
Rather
she
than
can't actually do anything
Yeah.
about his behaviour.
rather than necessarily.
Because then she can understand the feeling.
Yeah.
Understand how to act.
Diane's position is in that space.
Because like
Because if you're
they
expected
have
to
a
line
back
manage
attitude
someone,
and stuff like
then
that.
you should
I
be
think
able
maybe
to
if there was
listen
something
from
positive
yourself.
for
But
each
then
person
it
to
takes
take
a
away
case
from
on
it,
so
that
can
can
say,
change the perception of this
involved in
situation.
it. So I
I
think
think
there's
that would really help.
There's kind of
in
like,
the other areas.
Diane's like this middle person,
I
but
think the reality
doesn't really
by
have
this point is to like
authority to
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you what to do, but if you don't do it, I can't do anything about it.
and now he's practically
Yeah. Maybe a meeting or something needs to come in that's totally not on anyone's
But
side.
I don't think that's appropriate in this because he's being
Things and,
harassment.
But-
So if we're in another
personal,
setting, so
attachment
but it's an
situations.
accusation in the celebrity, some sort of child.
It makes you realise how much
This
it's
is about
about
this now, you don't allow them to try.
becomes
So I don't think it's
Yeah.
actually productive for Diane to
So,
continue,
yeah,
just while
exactly,
this
it's
is
not dealt
happening,
with.
for Diane to continue overseeing.
Oh, not in this instance, yeah, it's happening at the moment. I would have had very confident to try and refuse this, but also what makes it more difficult in defining position is that there's a collective bargaining agreement which is in dispute.
being able to quit. That's why we're all like
So,
that.
the other thing is, if that's in dispute, then how do you define exactly what the result is, if there's no sort of agreement
I've had no
between.
sleep, but I had sleep last night, but it was the best sleep ever, and text waking up. I want a week off now.
Is it in this out somewhere else?
Yeah.
I just see.
Yeah, that has sucked.
And not micromanaging at the same time.
I'm ready to.
You ready to go?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Very tired. Want another minute?
Yeah.
Would the other option be to give Bob some paper money to, and then say that he's part of this group after we go?
You guys nearly ready to share? One more minute?
Expect the same thing of Diane.
Of course, but then it's also kind of like that is this is a set to the environment.
But it's paid time off.
No, I would say that he
Well, I work
working
with
very
you.
hard
We left
towards
Wednesday.
Oh, I would.
Are you sorry? You're just like,
So we left Wednesday, came back last Tuesday.
Be the most valuable asset we
Can
have.
be the most
Yeah, well,
valuable.
I started on Tuesday.
I got my
Like,
first grey hair because I got
like,
light up, so
so
that's just so I'm blaming them.
Yeah, but the issue is
And then I
that sort
literally
of stuff
just
that you do that earlier on.
watched Netflix for a
But
while.
we're not, and the problem is we're not there. I don't know, that's not good, that's.
No, but
What can you do with the mess that they've created?
well, the rest of the creative is that I would not have my
Yeah, Grace came, has stuff leaving on the 5th of December.
Is there another department Bob can go to?
On the 12th.
possible.
Right.
Because there's not a bit of time.
Small work team at a government agency, can I make him work somewhere else?
Alright, let's see what we
Handball.
came up with.
It'd be nice to have.
Did your group want to start and share?
You're ready, so.
I didn't want to. With the cognitive side of it, we just were looking at all of their perceptions were totally different. Like
Yeah.
they both saw it from a different view.
Yeah.
And I think that it should have been addressed way back then, all the different perceptions. Is that what we kind of talked about?
Yeah.
Bob was very emotionally hurt by this. It wasn't just a what happened sort of thing, but he was not feeling, we were kind of saying he's not feeling acknowledged or, so, I don't know where else we went with the emotional side of things.
Oh, and I think we spoke about how Bob's frustration was causing Diane's frustration.
To them, for them, her to get angry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so then there were a whole lot of emotional complications
Yeah.
to it because it wasn't addressed discussing earlier.
Yeah.
And that was his behaviour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess ultimately it was the behavioural dimension that you want to see change.
Yeah.
That was sort of the outcome of
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
And I guess to me, because I'm cognitive, analytical, all that kind of thing, I would take the cognitive approach as the most, or just personally, the most important, because if we can change the way their perception is, the way they think about things, then everything else would just sort of fall into place, or that's how it seems to me.
Yeah.
Even just with the gratitude thing that we've been talking about, when Grant was saying to have a party as if they're leaving, say all the nice things about them, and they don't leave, sort of thing. That sort of thing. Maybe each of them need something like that, especially, what's his name, Bob.
Good. And for the behavioural part as well, we kind of ended with there's no kind of happy outcome by this point. It's too late. The conflict should have been addressed and acted on earlier.
Yeah, it would have been a lot easier if it was dealt with much earlier. That's good. Thank you.
I think all that's compounded by upper management, what's going on there as well. Sally isn't emotionally invested in Bob or Diane. She's only known them for 2 months and started. Even though they've had the same training, similar training, similar positions. So that would be an awkward thing to try and micromanage Bob, because he would feel violated, and that would be a bad thing. That's a difficult one, this one. Because you've got things happening on different levels.
Yes. Anyone want to add anything further to that?
We did talk at the very beginning about chat about what's the most kind of like a quick fix solution, but it's just sitting them down, communicating with all of them what you actually want to have happen here, how can we move forward, and then maybe not having Diane manage Bob for a while this is also it's just as a starting point to not pull her out of her position, but to let someone else manage Bob so the emotions can kind of not be in front of each other all the time.
I think it's a good example when things get to that level of emotional reactivity that it's affecting behaviour. It's really difficult. Like, this would be a really difficult case to step into and try and resolve them.
Or just move into another department. It's in a government agency, so there's somewhere else where you can go.
I mean, that might be what it comes down to. You might get to a point you say, you know what, the conflict's just it's not going to be resolved. And what's fair? What's fair to Bob? Well, you might not care too much about Bob. He might be really upsetting you and frustrating you, but you might be saying, Diane shouldn't have to be dealing with this, or
But it also just goes to show what Bob thinks is fair. It could be completely different to what we think is fair, because he's saying the whole time that he's being treated unfairly, but ultimately, the way that I see it, well, actually, he's been treated fairly.
Historically, with officers, do we resolve conflict resolution? Do we resolve that by moving them on, or do we actually sit down? I mean, I've seen that.
Really good question.
Or is it more of a model where we can sit down and talk to people?
It just varies so much, and I mean, I've observed it done well, and know of plenty of cases where it hasn't happened very well at all levels of the organisation.
Do you have a team or people?
HR would get involved if it got to a certain point. So typically you'd find yourself with minor issues involved in this sort of thing. By the time it starts to affect things like employment, you'd definitely be wanting to get some support from HR. So this is probably one step above the pay grade for officers in one sense. But at what point in this does it? Do you know what I mean? Like, at what point do you go, this is now an HR issue and I need to get HR involved? And I think that's where having these different models or different ways to look at it can be important.
And there's a process there was on the old AUE site of how to know whether it is HR reportable.
And normally early in your officership, if not before leaving, as one of the say-so classes, you have a class with HR, and they'll say, at this point, involved. It's never too early. I think you can
they
say.
can even decide for you whether they need to come in.
Yeah, that's right. They'll say, no, you're okay. Just do this or do that. It's really good to get them, even just as an awareness thing. Shoot off an email and say, just so you're aware, I'm dealing with this. This is where it's at.
Because I think that's where a mediator is really good, and I think that's what this situation needs too. Someone to come from outside the situation that isn't so emotionally charged with everything that's going on, and to just take I don't know what to say, like an unbiased perception of the situation and just what really is happening. Because sometimes when you're involved in something that's as messy as this, you lose all your sense of perception and everything. All you can think about is, well, often yourself and how badly you've been treated.
And Bob's really pushing it, but normally it'd be a little bit more subtle and insidious than that. And you'd be kind of, is this the point I involve HR? Is this the point? It gets extra complicated if they're a member of your church as well as an employee, and that can be fairly common as well. So you're kind of working with this person pastorally, but you might also be their line manager. And what do you guys come up with?
I think Bob felt discouraged. So something like give to Bob some task to feel accomplishment. So encouraging him. I think I just never would have.
Encouraging that.
Has worked in the over 12 years, and Diane is a new staff. So Bob felt very discouraged. Feel either failure, control with Diane.
It's a bit of a pastoral response, perhaps really dealing primarily with the emotional aspect of what's going on. We don't have time, but if I put up a different theory, then we would have all approached it from a different perspective. So I think we can see that what the dimensions model offers is valuable and valid. But if we were talking about anger and then moving on, or trust, or power, or what we can see, so many ways to approach conflict, and I think either through the book or I'll give you a copy of these slides. Before you just launch in and start dealing with it, you really want to think, well, what's my approach here? There's some types of conflict, one particular idea will work and another won't as well. Sometimes you'll just feel, this really fits what's going on here. If it is a matter of grief or anger, then maybe you just kind of be wanting to be a little bit extra conscious of what's going on there. If you feel that, the trust has been broken, your mind might go somewhere else. If you think, well, boundaries are really being crossed in this situation, then maybe that's the way to approach it. So, good to take a step back and try to put on the analytical hat. Much easier if it doesn't involve you than when it does. I just love the idea of defining reality. What is really going on here? What can I see and what can't I see? What can I understand and don't understand? What's knowable and what's not knowable? These are big, helpful questions. Just a quick thought on Jesus and conflict. It's interesting to think how Jesus resolved conflict. There's some pretty, and there's some other great examples in the Bible of clever ways. The woman caught in adultery is probably one of the most ingenious ways of resolving conflict in recorded history. But it's also worth noting that Jesus in fact creates a lot of conflict. He's often at the centre of conflict, pushing the boundaries, and not just for the sake of it either, but that there's a bigger conflict going on. in an Israel occupied by the Roman Empire, where inherent injustices are happening daily, and Jesus steps into that, and I would say he causes non-violent conflict to reduce violent conflict. I think if I had to summarise what Jesus does, dies at the hands of those. In Gandhi called it Satyagraha. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly, but it means soul force. And you'd be, I presume, fairly familiar with Gandhi's non-violent approach, which Martin Luther King replicated. This sense of just trying to allow justice to speak into a situation, and this sense of truth and the force of that truth. I think of that particularly when dealing with unjust forms of conflict. Sometimes we do need to stand up. It's not we touched on it very briefly, but sometimes it's not a conflict between two equals. Sometimes there is someone who is being treated unfairly, and we need to step into that. Again, mindful not to be sort of triangulated in the situation, but at the same time not getting involved. That laissez-faire approach of, oh, nah, it's not my business. I don't want to get triangulated here. So I do think that's also something helpful. But yeah, just I guess to be aware of how you feel about conflict and your gut reaction and ability to move well in this space. It's a difficult one. But yeah, not to do it alone. It's not only HR you can call when you're really in a difficult situation. Sometimes you think, oh, I can't really talk to HR about this. This is a church issue. You've developed some good relationships with people here. You know, none of us are going to be upset if we get a phone call or an email saying this is happening. The most dangerous approach to conflict resolution is trying to manage it all yourself when you really don't think you can. You know, no one needs a hero. What we need is a good outcome, and you don't have to do that alone. Within the new army structure, the area officers most likely going to be the first port of call. But there's a lot of people and processes in place, so don't do it on your own. Do it with the support of others. The day-to-day nature means you have to have some basic grasp, and hopefully this content, puts a few more tools in the toolbox around how to approach that. Because wisdom is discerning when to do what. Thanks for your time.
Have fun.